Welcome to my channel. They said a woman could never make that shot until the fate of the world came down to a single trigger pull. One bullet, 7,000 meters, zero mistakes. This is the untold story of Fiona Kade, the ghost sniper who stopped a nuclear war when no one believed she could. They said a woman could never land that shot. I'd heard it more than once, in whispers at the range, in snide remarks during mission briefings, and straight from the mouth of Commander Briggs, a seasoned SEAL who never once looked my way during planning meetings. But in the end, when nuclear war was 30 seconds from launch, he turned to me, the same woman he'd dismissed, and said with a tremor in his voice, "You're the only chance we have." My name is Specialist Fiona Kade. I'm 29, born and raised in the jagged cold of Talkeetna, Alaska. Dark red hair, usually tucked in twin tactical braids, and eyes sharpened not by makeup, but by the endless calculations that unfold every time I take aim. I've served as a long-range precision shooter for 6 years, deployed in the Army's Ghost Detachment, the kind of unit that leaves no records and no room for error. I wasn't born into war, but I was raised to understand it. My father, a retired recon Marine named Joe Kade, taught me from the age of 8 that marksmanship wasn't about squeezing a trigger, it was about listening. To the wind, to the silence between breaths, to the numbers dancing in the margins of chaos. By 16, I was tagging soda cans from over a mile away. Not because I was gifted, because I trained like obsession. Every weekend, Dad and I hiked to the remote ridgelines of the Alaskan interior, up where the air thinned and the wind howled through valleys like a living creature. He taught me to measure not just drop and drift, but the humidity off snow banks, the bounce of rounds over frozen tundra, the way temperature layered between cloud shadows could bend trajectories. "Fiona," he said during one bitter January morning as we zeroed an old Remington 700, "some shots don't just hit targets. Some shots change the outcome of wars." He wasn't just talking ballistics. He meant responsibility. That's what I carried into the Army at 18. Not some vague sense of duty, but the precision of consequences. By the time I joined sniper school, I was already hitting past 2,000 meters with beat-up rifles and minimal tech. The instructors didn't know what to do with me. On paper, I had no business outperforming seasoned candidates. But during one drill, I landed a 3,100-meter shot through a shifting crosswind while tracking a moving target. When asked how I did it, I listed off 12 variables, including a sudden barometric drop that had happened minutes before. The instructors went silent. Still, some of the guys joked that I did math, not war. As if precision were some academic parlor trick instead of what separated life from death. And then came Commander Briggs. He commanded SEAL Team 9. Decorated, hardened, every inch of him shaped by the old rules. Loyalty to muscle memory, distrust of innovation. He didn't hate me. He just didn't believe I belonged. Not because I couldn't shoot, but because I didn't fit his version of what combat looked like. His world was steel and sweat and gut instinct. Mine was calculus and silence, and staying 3 steps ahead of the wind. He barely acknowledged me during joint task force briefs. Even when mission planners reviewed my kill record, 63 confirmed, most at distances previously considered impractical in combat, he'd lean back in his chair, arms folded, and mutter something like, "We'll put real shooters on Overwatch." I didn't rise to it. I just logged more hours, more models, more quiet studies in terrain simulation. What changed everything started in an intel folder marked Orion Incident. A rogue nuclear physicist named Pavel Gurevich, ex-Russian state weapons developer, had stolen enriched uranium from an underground lab in Uzbekistan. Satellite photos picked up heat signatures near a sealed mountain facility. No accessible entry, no airstrike window, no drones that could sneak through the jamming tech blanketing the region. And no time. If Gurevich launched his custom-built nuke toward Tehran or New Delhi, it would trigger a retaliatory strike, guaranteed. Billions of lives. Gone. The only shot was, well, a shot. One bullet. From over 7,000 meters out. Fired before he could hit the ignition sequence. The room went tense when Briggs took control of the briefing. "We'll use Petty Officer Grant," he said, nodding toward one of his snipers. "Best long-range shot in our unit. Sealed combat. Proven under pressure." I raised my hand. "Sir," I said, calm but clear, I've trained and executed shots at 3,500 meters in live ops. My calculations suggest this can be done with specific correction algorithms I've tested for extreme elevation. Briggs didn't even glance at me. This mission, he said, needs someone who doesn't blink when the world's on fire. A woman's nerves aren't built for that kind of pressure. I didn't flinch. I just turned to my gear and began charting wind patterns. For the next 3 days, while Briggs' team ran drills and attempted mock infiltrations, I perched on a frozen ledge 7,214 meters from the facility. Using every tool, every ounce of intuition, and every hour of my upbringing, I refined the only thing that might matter. One shot. I wasn't there to make a point. I was there because no one else had run the numbers. The ridge I found was near invisible to satellite overlays, a jagged spit of rock jutting above the southern face of the Darien Cliffs. From there, I had a line of sight to Gurevich's facility. Barely. The air was thin, gusts unpredictable, and elevation shifts meant even laser rangefinders had trouble locking in clean. But I knew what I was doing. I spent the first 6 hours just listening, to the rhythm of the wind as it swept over the pass, to the snow particles bouncing like static against my gear. Every movement of air told a story. The gusts were not random. They pulsed in cycles, winding down the valley like breath. I built my equations with that wind as the heartbeat. Temperature layers, barometric decay, gravity drift, the Earth's rotation. When you shoot past 7,000 meters, Coriolis isn't just theoretical. It shifts the bullet's arc by meters. And if you miss by even 1 degree, 1/2 step off in data or prediction, you don't just miss. You cost the world its next decade. Every night, I recalculated. Grant, the SEAL sniper Briggs chose, gave up after 2 days. He couldn't lock sight past 4,000 meters. His optics weren't calibrated for it. His scope couldn't stabilize in the cold. His confidence cracked the moment his shots dropped 200 feet short in simulation. Briggs was still trying to save face. His gear isn't right. We'll retool it, he said, like the bullet drop was the fault of a faulty stock and not the law of physics. He refused to come see what I'd built. I'd aligned my rifle like it was a satellite installation. Tripods ground-staked into the rock, each foot calibrated for height variance. My elevation dial was hand-modded for ultra-fine correction, and my range tables weren't just charts. They were layered matrices built from wind behavior across a 24-hour window. This wasn't about squeezing the trigger. It was about solving a problem in real time with zero room for guessing. On the third night, I didn't sleep. The thermal drone scans showed movement near the missile housing. 6 techs and Gurevich himself. The silo doors were warming. Final checks. I radioed command. No reply. Jammed. Briggs' team had tried one last approach at dusk. They were pushed back hard. One of their operators got wounded, caught by shrapnel from a trip-mined ravine. They couldn't get close without alerting the defense AI systems. Then I got a call. Not from command. From Briggs himself. Specialist Kade. His voice sounded different over the secure channel. We're out of options. Command has denied air intervention. All units are pinned. They say, use whatever asset is left. He couldn't say it. So I did. You want me to take the shot? Silence. Then, can you do it? I looked through my scope. Over 7,000 meters of frozen mountain between me and the target. Wind shifting every 15 seconds. Gurevich pacing beside the launch terminal, surrounded by concrete and steel and history's final countdown. I can, I said. Briggs exhaled. You miss, and the world burns. I adjusted my elevation dial. I'm aware. I had already charted everything. Gurevich's pacing rhythm, his posture, the delay between his check-ins. I knew his walk like a conductor knows a symphony. But the shot? It wasn't to where he stood. It was to where he would be. In 7, 8 seconds. That's how long it would take my round, traveling at 2,800 feet per second, to cross that abyss. I steadied my breath. Cold air in. Pulse slowing. My father once said, long-range fire isn't about being calm. It's about becoming part of the moment. You don't shoot. You just are the shot. Wind at 12 miles per hour, shifting from the east. Correction, 1, for Mills left. Drop, 312 feet. Adjusted for temperature inversion at 5,000 meters. Final scope lock, 1 empty space in the cold. I pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked, smooth and heavy. The bullet disappeared into the horizon. 7, 8 seconds. I counted in heartbeats. By 5, I couldn't breathe. By 7, my hands trembled. At 7, 8, Gurevich fell. Dead center. A single impact. His hand still hovered inches above the launch console. The missile did not fire. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. Target neutralized, I said into comms. My voice didn't shake. The silence after that was longer than the shot itself. When Briggs finally answered, he didn't say anything at first. Then, Jesus Christ. You just saved the planet. But I wasn't done yet. Because a bullet might stop a launch, but warheads still needed to be secured. Systems powered down. Facilities swept. I packed my rifle. Started hiking toward the blast-proof gate. I wasn't just a sniper anymore. I was the one who had to make sure this ending stayed ended. I didn't celebrate. There wasn't time, and there wasn't space in my head for that kind of emotion. The second the shot landed, I dismantled my firing rig and began the descent. The path was narrow and iced over, the kind of trail no one used unless they'd studied how the mountain breathed. I had, for days, every crevice, every heat pocket, every chance for an avalanche. I moved like I was part of the terrain. Briggs was still on the comms. Command is verifying impact. We've got satellite confirmation. Facility is no longer under Gurevich's control. Repeat, launch has been stopped. But there was tension in his voice. Stopping the launch was only the first move. Now came the sweep. There could be deadman switches, secondary triggers, or worse, a team ready to launch manually if they realized Gurevich was down. I need confirmation from inside the site, Briggs said. Until we lock those warheads down, this isn't over. I was already moving. The facility was buried beneath concrete and snow, flanked by a forest of jamming towers and drone sentries that now blinked red. Offline or searching for orders they would never receive again. I skirted the outer perimeter. My rifle slung across my back, my sidearm drawn. I slipped past the last snow bank and reached the blast door, just as a SEAL breacher team arrived from the East Trail, their faces pale, their steps unsure. One of them raised his weapon before lowering it again. Kade, he said, you were the shot. I nodded. His mouth stayed open like he wanted to say something. He didn't. Instead, he turned back to the panel and began overriding the security door with a charge kit. The blast was clean. We moved in. Inside, the air was warm, too warm. Emergency lights flickered down the corridor. Gurevich's body was slumped halfway between the control bank and a reinforced vault. The vault was open. Empty. Where's the warhead? I asked. A technician, Army EOD specialist, stepped forward, checking the internal diagnostics. Launch was stopped, but not neutralized. The warhead was still prepped for final transport. He was relocating it when you hit him. Transported where? There's an underground rail system tied into the old Soviet mines, he said. Secondary launch pad. Probably a backup. I felt it like a punch to the chest. Gurevich had planned for failure. This wasn't just a doomsday setup. It was a fail-safe plan with multiple triggers. He knew someone might try to stop him, and he'd built layers around that possibility. We need to follow the line, I said. Backup teams en route, Briggs confirmed over the comms. But Kade, you're closest. If you can find the secondary point, hold it. You've got clearance to engage. My legs were already moving. I followed the corridor down through steel hatchways until I reached a maintenance shaft, pitch black, save for red emergency LEDs. I slid down the ladder 3 levels, boots landing on rail gravel soaked in oil. Tracks stretched ahead into darkness. I ran. For over a mile, I moved through that tunnel, my flashlight bouncing over walls etched in frost. At the far end, I found it, a second blast vault, open, abandoned. Snow poured in from a shattered emergency exit. Outside, tire tracks. The warhead was gone, but not far. A glint of metal in the snow told me they hadn't gotten far before abandoning the transport. It was there, half-covered, mounted on a sled rig, surrounded by 3 motionless bodies. Guards, dead from hypothermia or panic. I didn't check which. What mattered was that the warhead was untouched. I knelt beside it, checked the seals. Still armed. Timer never started. The launch was real, but it was Gurevich's finger, and his alone, that would have lit the fuse. I exhaled, not from relief. From necessity. I'd held my breath for too long. Briggs, this is Kade, I said. Warhead located. Secondary site is clear. There was a pause. Then, you're You're confirming recovery? Yes. She's cold, but untouched. Launch scrubbed. Threat is over. Another silence. This one full of something else. Reverence. Maybe disbelief. Then, softly, understood. Recovery teams en route. Stand by. I sat back against the rock wall. My legs finally gave out. For the first time in hours, I let the fatigue catch me. 7,000 meters. One bullet. No backup. And a warhead in the snow. They said I couldn't make the shot. Now they were calling me the one who stopped a war. But I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired. And very aware of the cold. I closed my eyes and waited for the sky to turn light again. The world had turned on a shot they said couldn't be made. But I'd never needed their belief. Just the numbers. By the time the recovery team reached my position, the mountain had gone silent again. The wind had died, like the world itself was holding its breath after what had nearly happened. 2 Black Hawks touched down in the clearing near the secondary vault. SEAL medics leapt out first, scanning the site, weapons drawn, until they saw me sitting beside the warhead. I dug a small trench around it using the blade on my multi-tool. Not because it needed to be buried, but because it gave me something to do with my hands while I waited. Precision has a rhythm, and without numbers to crunch or scopes to dial, I needed to move. Briggs stepped out of the second chopper. He wasn't wearing his usual armor-plated arrogance. Today, his gait was slower. His shoulders carried something heavier than gear. When he walked up to me, he didn't speak right away. His eyes swept over the sled, the fallen guards, then me. "You're alive," he said. "Technically." He tried to offer a smile, but it fell short. "I'll admit it," he said. "I didn't think you could do it." I stood slowly, knees stiff from hours in the cold. "You didn't have to," I said. "The math did." That shut him up for a while. As the EOD team moved in to stabilize the warhead, Briggs followed me back toward the chopper. We passed the trail I'd carved alone. It looked impossibly thin now, like a shadow across ice. Halfway back, he paused. "How did you even make that shot?" he asked. I turned, the cold cutting deep into my jacket now. "You really want to know?" Briggs nodded. "I do." So I told him. About the pressure shifts I tracked every hour. The thermal layering that split the air like glass. The way I predicted wind pulses based on the swirl patterns and smoke rising from the exhaust vents. How I had to aim 43 feet above where Gurevich stood. How the shot wasn't aimed at him, but at where he would be in 7, 8 seconds. I told him I even had to adjust for spin drift. The subtle pull caused by the rifle's rifling that would have nudged the bullet right by a full meter at that distance. When I was done, he just stared. "That's not shooting," he said quietly. "That's physics poetry." "No," I replied. "It's discipline, numbers, and knowing the difference between a guess and a solution." He nodded again, this time with something close to respect. "They'll want you in D.C. for this. Medal of Honor. Briefings. Headlines." I shook my head. "They can brief someone else. I didn't take that shot for ribbons." Briggs looked at me with something deeper in his eyes now. Recognition. Maybe even regret. "For what it's worth," he said, "I was wrong about you." I didn't say anything. Because the truth was, it didn't matter if he was wrong or right. The shot had been made. The war had been stopped. His approval couldn't add to that, and his doubt hadn't taken away from it. What mattered, the only thing that mattered, was that I'd done what needed doing when the world balanced on the edge of annihilation. I didn't do it for glory. I did it because the bullet had to fly exactly where it did, measured in millimeters, timed to the heartbeat of a planet teetering between peace and hell. And I was the only one who had the math to make it happen. We lifted off 20 minutes later. As the chopper banked away from the frozen valley, I looked down one last time at the ridge where it all began. 7,000 meters of silence. One shot. A world still turning. We landed at Forward Ops Base Vega just before sunrise. Word had traveled faster than the wind. Before I even stepped off the bird, half the base already knew. Technicians with red-rimmed eyes. Officers straightening their uniforms with a stiffness that had nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with shame. They hadn't believed either. Now they didn't know what to say. As I stepped onto the tarmac, heads turned, but no one moved. The respect felt awkward, not reverent, but hesitant, like they didn't know whether to salute or apologize. Briggs walked beside me. His presence made it worse. The man who once said, "A woman can't make that shot," was now flanking me like a security detail. "Base commander wants a debrief," he said. I nodded. "Of course he does." They led me into a narrow conference room with warm maps on the walls and cold coffee in steel carafes. General Merrick sat at the head of the table, clean-cut, decorated, stiff as an iron fence. "Specialist Kade," he said. "Sit." I did. He studied me with a mixture of analysis and discomfort. "You stopped a global war last night." "No," I replied. "I stopped one man from lighting a match." He tapped the table once with his knuckle. "We're pulling everything you used into analysis. Your scope data, bullet telemetry, environmental readings. The Joint Chiefs already flagged the shot for top-level review." "Figures. You understand what this means, don't you?" I nodded. "That no one gets to say it's impossible anymore." "No," he said slowly. "That the doctrine has to change." That surprised me. He leaned forward. "Your methods, they weren't just accurate. They were repeatable. We've reviewed the targeting models. Your math was cleaner than anything we've ever seen. You solved an engagement range the Pentagon has considered theoretical for decades." I stayed silent. Let the words settle. He continued. "There will be studies, conferences, probably even a new training directive based on what you've built." I finally looked up. "And will they teach the part where you all ignored me until there were no other options?" That shut the room up. Briggs, standing in the back, shifted his stance. General Merrick sighed. "There are institutional realities, biases, excuses," I said, sharper than I intended. Merrick didn't argue. He just nodded. "Agreed." They asked a few more technical questions. I answered all of them, detailed as ever: ballistic coefficients, wind formulas, pressure decay modeling. When I finished, I stood. "Is that all, sir?" "Actually," Merrick said, reaching into a folder, "you've been recommended for promotion. And for the Medal of Honor." I blinked. I should have felt proud. I didn't. I just felt detached. "It doesn't change anything," I said. "Maybe not," Merrick replied. "But it changes us." I didn't go back to my unit right away. Instead, I spent 3 days reviewing every frame of sensor footage from the mission, every wind model, every micro-correction I made. Because I knew if they were going to study this shot, I wanted the data right. On the 4th day, a SEAL approached me in the mess hall. Younger, shaved head, hands that hadn't quite stopped shaking. "You're Fiona Kade," he said. "The one who took the shot." I looked up from my tray. "Yes." He didn't ask for a picture, didn't ask to shake hands. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. "I was in the valley, watching. You didn't just make that shot. You gave us time to breathe again." Then he walked away. That, more than any medal, hit me hard. Because sometimes war doesn't need a hero. It just needs one person who understands that millimeters matter more than myths. And I had been that person. The thing they never teach you about extreme range shooting is that the shot isn't the hardest part. Waiting is. Waiting for the bullet to travel. Waiting for the outcome to reveal itself. Waiting for command to either acknowledge you or file you away as another technical anomaly. In those long seconds, and the days that followed, I realized the shot had changed more than the war. It had changed me. I didn't walk around with swagger. Didn't strut into rooms expecting salutes or gratitude. I returned to my workbench in the base's weapons lab. I logged hours recalibrating scopes and rewriting ballistic code. But something had shifted, not in what I did, but in how people looked at me. Before the mission, I was the math girl with a gun. Now I was the ghost who saved the world. Some avoided me, maybe intimidated by what they didn't understand. Others started asking for guidance. "How do you calculate drop across jet stream interference? What do you use for wind when thermal inversion flips mid-mountain?" I answered every question, not because I owed them, but because if someone had explained it to me 10 years earlier, maybe I wouldn't have had to prove it the hard way. One evening, I found myself back in the armory range, long after it closed. No one was around. I set up my favorite rifle, the same one I'd used for the shot. It still bore the scrape along the chassis where it had dragged against granite. I laid out a dummy target at 500 meters. A child's game compared to what I'd done, but I wasn't here for practice. I was here for reflection. The scope was still dialed for 7,214 meters. I turned it down. My hands moved automatically, years of training mapped into muscle memory. Then I stopped. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it. Not pride, not relief, grief, for what it took to get here. For every time I'd been dismissed. For every whisper, every laugh, every meeting where they skipped my name, even though my data was sharper than theirs. And for Gurevich, too. Not because he deserved pity, but because the world had once believed he could help build peace, and instead, he chose annihilation. When I pulled that trigger, I hadn't just ended a threat. I'd proven what no textbook, no medal, no commander ever could. That silence can be mightier than thunder. That science isn't soft, it's surgical. And that sometimes, it takes a woman they never expected to make the shot no one else even dared attempt. The next morning, I found a sealed envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside, a single handwritten note. You redefined the battlefield. Keep teaching us how. No signature. But I knew whose handwriting it was. Briggs. Maybe change wasn't sweeping. Maybe it didn't roar through corridors like orders. Maybe it arrived like a note under the door, quiet, anonymous, respectful. The wind had taught me that. Change happens not in thunder, but in drift, the subtle shift that guides everything else. I folded the note, tucked it inside the notebook where I kept all my data, next to the wind charts, where it belonged. Weeks passed. I expected the story to die quietly, buried in a classified folder, known only to the few who needed to know. But I was wrong. The Pentagon didn't want it buried. They wanted it dissected. First came the analysts, ballistic engineers, atmospheric physicists, combat doctrine advisors, all trying to reverse engineer my shot. They ran simulations, pored over weather logs, and tried to model the environmental drift the way I had. They couldn't, because their models were missing one thing: intuition born from thousands of hours on real ridgelines. Then came the invitations. Not medals, though those came later, but requests for lectures. At Quantico, at Langley, even at DARPA. They wanted to know how I did it, why it worked, and whether it could be taught. At first, I declined. I'm not a showpiece. But then I reconsidered. If the system was changing, and I'd been the catalyst, maybe I owed it to the next Fiona Kade, the girl who would be dismissed in the next meeting unless someone gave her proof she was worth listening to. So I stood at the front of a briefing room packed with top brass, chalk in hand, writing on a whiteboard like my life depended on it. I walked them through Rayol wind layers, pressure drops, heat shimmer deflection. I explained why every textbook on long-range shooting capped out too early, how no simulation accounted for dynamic terrain effects at 7 clicks out, how you needed time in the world, not just theory. And they listened. Some skeptical, but most curious. One general, a heavy-set man with snow-white hair and 3 stars on each collar, asked the question I'd been expecting. Why you? Why did you make the shot when others couldn't? I looked at him a long moment. Because I stopped trying to prove myself and started solving the problem. He nodded slowly. Then I added, and because I wasn't afraid to be exact, even if they called it overthinking. They didn't laugh. They wrote it down. That's when I knew something had cracked open. After one session, a young Air Force captain caught up with me in the hallway. She had calloused hands, grease stains near her collar. Probably a maintenance officer or avionics tech. Not the kind of person they usually send to sit in on sniper lectures. I'm not infantry, she said. But I watched your targeting breakdown. You think that kind of modeling can be applied to drone artillery? I smiled. The math doesn't care what's launching the projectile. It cares about accuracy. She grinned back. Then we need to talk. That conversation turned into 3 more. Then into a collaborative paper. Then into a prototype for a new targeting interface that married sniper logic with drone fire support. They called it Project Whisper. I just called it useful. The shot that stopped a war had sparked more than a footnote. It had ignited a rethinking of how we view precision, not as a support skill, but as a weapon all its own. Sniping, I told them, isn't just pulling a trigger. It's the entire discipline of reading a battlefield like a language and responding in decimals, not bullets. For the first time in years, they were listening, really listening, and I wasn't going to waste that chance. The medal ceremony was quiet, not what you'd expect from a moment built for headlines. They held it in an internal Pentagon chamber, white walls, low flags, polished boots. A row of generals. A single podium. The Medal of Honor gleamed inside a velvet box, like something taken from another world. Briggs was there. So were the commanders who'd once doubted me. Some clapped. Others just watched, unsure what to feel. The presenter, a defense secretary with decades of service in her eyes, read my citation with practiced grace. For unparalleled composure and calculated precision under conditions of extreme duress, and for preventing a nuclear catastrophe with a single ballistic solution executed at a range previously considered impossible. The words felt distant. When she pinned the medal to my uniform, she whispered, "You made history." Quietly. "That's harder than most realize." I nodded, not because I felt proud, but because I finally felt seen. Afterward, they offered interviews, appearances, a memoir deal, even a speaking tour. I turned them all down. I wasn't here to be famous. I was here to make sure the system didn't forget what it had nearly overlooked. They didn't need another legend. They needed better listeners. That night, I sat alone in my quarters, the medal still in its box on my desk. I didn't hang it, didn't display it. It felt heavy in a different way, like a weight that didn't belong on my chest. Instead, I pulled out the notebook I'd used during the mission. Pages filled with wind tables, humidity graphs, and hand-sketched models of Gurevich's compound. I flipped to the final page and wrote something simple. One bullet. One world. No mistakes. Then I tucked the medal inside, closed the book, and slid it into my locker. Not out of shame. Out of respect. Because I knew the truth. Medals fade. Memory doesn't. 2 weeks later, a training request came in. A new sniper school program was being developed. One that focused on extreme range engagement, environmental modeling, and non-traditional threat profiles. They wanted me to lead it. I said yes, not because I missed the field, but because I knew there were more like me. Out there, buried under systems that still thought muscle beat math. That instinct beat analysis. They needed someone to teach them that numbers weren't the enemy. They were the ally that never lied. The new recruits didn't know my story. Not at first. To them, I was just Instructor Kade. Strict, quiet, focused. I ran them through wind drills no one else used. I made them build their own ballistic tables from scratch. I forced them to fail before they succeeded. Because one day, they might stand on their own ridge, looking down the barrel of history. And when that day came, I didn't want them thinking about legends. I wanted them solving the math. They started calling it the Ghost Program behind my back. At first, I didn't get the joke. Then one of the trainees, a wiry kid from Wyoming with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, explained it. It's because you don't yell. You haunt people with questions until they get the answer right. I almost smiled. Almost. The Ghost Program became something none of us expected. Recruits stopped seeing long-range sniping as some mythical art reserved for the born and blessed. They started treating it like engineering, a system that anyone could master if they respected the work. My students didn't just memorize distances or dial corrections. They studied fluid dynamics, atmospheric physics. They learned to spot thermal ripples over rooftops and measure cloud shear by watching trees. I taught them that a successful shot didn't begin with the rifle, it began with observation. See the air, I'd say, before you move through it. And some of them did. I remember one student in particular, Leanne Park. Barely 20. Fast learner. Smarter than most of the staff who thought they were teaching her. On her final sim, she nailed a target at 3,900 meters in swirling desert crosswinds, using a rifle she built herself. Afterward, she walked up to me. "You really did it, didn't you?" she asked. "The shot." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Leanne nodded like that silence said more than any story. "You know what I realized, instructor?" she added. "It's not about being the best shot in the world. It's about being the only one who understands the shot." I looked her straight in the eyes. Exactly. When the brass visited our program, suits with shiny stars and agendas, they'd try to turn it into a pipeline. Scalable training models, they'd say. Exportable doctrine. I shut that down every time. Because what I taught wasn't a checklist. It was a mindset. You can't fast-track that. You have to grow it. Slowly, through repetition, discipline, and the kind of obsessive attention to detail that the battlefield rarely rewards, until the day it saves the world. Sometimes, late at night, I'd walk the empty range, just to listen to the wind again, to remember what it sounded like before the shot, before they believed. One night, I heard someone whisper behind me, "She's real," a trainee muttered, probably thinking I was out of earshot. "Ghost is real." It made me stop, not because I liked the name, I didn't, but because it reminded me that the shot had never been about fame or approval. It had been about truth. Cold, hard, unforgiving, but always exact. There's a myth in the military. That greatness comes in explosions. In moments of loud, decisive force, breaching doors, airstrikes, flags raised on ridgelines. But the truth? Sometimes greatness comes in silence, in waiting, in calculation, in the click of a dial, the whisper of a breath held just right, the invisible flight of a bullet that curves through air and time and impossible odds to land where it must. That's what I taught my recruits, and that's what I'll carry long after my last round is fired. The day I retired, the wind was high. I stood on the same ridge, or one just like it, above a newer training facility built into the Utah Desert Range. They'd asked me to speak to the graduating class of Ghost Program Cycle 9. I declined the podium. Instead, I handed each graduate a small, laminated card. One side bore the formula for wind deflection at range over 5,000 meters. The other bore a quote, not from a general, not from a sniper legend. It was from my father. A real sniper knows one bullet can change the course of history, and that the responsibility is heavier than the trigger. They read it quietly, and every single one tucked it into their chest pocket. When I packed my gear for the last time, I found that note from Briggs again, the one he slipped under my door after the mission. You redefined the battlefield. Keep teaching us how. I placed it alongside the Medal of Honor, now scratched and worn from travel. Not in a frame, but in the same notebook I used the night I made the shot. The pages still smelled faintly of gun oil and frost. I'm not the legend they wrote about in the post-op reports. I'm not the ghost they whisper about on sniper ranges. I'm a woman who solved a problem when everyone else thought it couldn't be solved. And because of that, cities still stand. Mothers still tuck their kids into bed. Satellites still blink in the night sky instead of watching mushroom clouds rise. Not because I was better than anyone else, but because I prepared better than anyone else. I saw what they didn't, and I believed what they refused to. That precision wasn't a liability. It was salvation. If you've ever been doubted, if they've ever told you your way was too slow, too technical, too careful, remember this. The bullet that saved the world didn't come from instinct. It came from a woman, alone on a mountain, with a notebook full of equations and no time left to prove them.